CGP.
Cleveland Gaming Podcast.
Video games, culture, anime, toys, pinball, tabletop.
CGP.
Cleveland
Gaming Podcast. Here we go. CGP. This is the Cleveland Gaming Podcast.
CGP.
Time to press start.
Greetings and what's up, fellow nerds, gamers, and everything in between. Great to have you joining us for another listen in on the Cleveland Gaming Podcast, the best podcast about gaming in all the land. My name is Corey. I'm the program manager, MC of the Cleveland Gaming Classic, and number 3 on the leaderboard, straight behind the man, the myth, the absolute icon that is the final boss.
Is that my cue? Am I late?
Mr. Tom Jenkins. Oh, hey. I was giving you a dramatic pause, and you just... Wow. I guess you're just excited about today. I respect it. It's fine.
That's my other dramatic pause. I was waiting. Sorry. No, I'm here, though. I'm as I always say, I'm excited. We're back. I've been dreaming about this podcast. As you'll find later, maybe there's some... No, I'm leading our viewers to think there's something relative to dreams in this podcast and our guest today. See what I'm doing there, Corey? I'm trying to step up my game now that we've been doing this.
I do see what you're doing, and I think that our listeners will clearly see exactly what he's talking about, as our guest is a friend of the Cleveland Gaming Classic and has some really great things to say. But before that, our show is brought to you by all of you with your listening ear holes for tuning in and following us on all the socials. That's Facebook, that's Instagram, that's TikTok, the Cleveland Gaming Classic, and of course, visit our website, GameCleveland.com, to get all the latest updates on the Cleveland Gaming Classic. But the update right now is it's time for a really cool Q&A with an amazing intellectual from Kent State.
You want to jump in and let's see what develops.
Woof. Indie games right now, I think, are in the best place that they could be. I am hungry for games that are not AAA titles that cost me $70, because even Nintendo now, their AAA games are going at the $70 minimum. And I'm all about an experience that I can complete, sit down, enjoy, and not have to download another $120 worth of DLC.
No, I agree with that. I think one of the interesting things that interesting but also really smart things that the publisher did for Kudzu was to put it in at $5, which makes it a great impulse buy game. And it's I'm seeing most people clock in around 6 to 7 hours their first playthrough, and I'm like, go for $5.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting more than your time worth of value. I mean, we can talk to Tom about how I've sunk hours of his life out of suggesting Vampire Survivors. But I can't give him those hours back now, and he's still red under the eyes from all the vampiring.
But it is interesting, though, too, right? I always wondered that as a game developer, right? It's funny. It's one thing on your phone, right? When you're looking at a game, or even on Switch or anything, you're like, oh my gosh, it's $4.99 or $19.99, right? It seems like such a barrier of entry. But then when you play it, you're in. Next thing you know, you're 120 plus hours in, right? Definitely getting your ROI there, right?
I mean, I'm going to throw this out there, though, because just in terms of labor, because labor in the games industry is a thing right now. All games should cost at least $40. Everybody puts in $40 worth of work. Is that a smart, in today's economics, is that a smart way to price a game? No.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Hard.
Right? Yeah,
it's
that's
so
the hard
hard
part, I would imagine, right? And that's what we always say too. It's simple consumer economics, right? We always talk about the show, right, in the same kind of spirit, right? We put so much in, every year. It's oh my gosh, there's $500,000 of arcade games here, right? And then people are like, oh my gosh, I remember when tickets used to be $5. Well, yeah, we also, back in the day, we had 5 CRT tube TVs, and now, similar to you, right, and developers, I can't even imagine, number one, the storytelling and building it, and gameplay, design, testing. You obviously know a lot more than we possibly ever could, but $40 is a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, and honestly, the two things. Number one, and speaking of cost, the biggest cost of people is actually their time over their money. How much time are they spending on it? which is why I appreciate a game that has an end and doesn't ask me to have like infinite time, a finite amount of time in my full schedule. I love it. And in the same point to you, Chris, as an artist, as someone who performs on the stage, and I'll put in, hours in a rehearsal, and you walk out and you don't even get $1, you do it for the love of it. It's great. However, artistry does cost something, right? And it's our time and our love and our passion. As much as I love applause, and I think it's great, it's also good to support the people that put it all together. Speaking of putting it all together, we've been doing a podcast for the last couple minutes and we haven't even introduced you. So let's go and introduce our guest here at the Cleveland Gaming Podcast. It is the Associate Professor, Program Coordinator in Animation Game Design, Kent State Wise, and of course, our next door neighbor at multiple conventions is Chris Totten. What's up, man?
Not much. Program's going great. We're excited. This week is our big, our showcase, our spring showcase, and I was just watching the students' trailers for my capstone class, and they look amazing. I think are going to be some real, festival contenders coming up here. Just put out my homebrew Game Boy game Kudzu on both Game Boy and the Nintendo Switch, so that's really cool. And then we're plugging away at our other indie game that we're doing with my friends Ben Cole and Adrian Sandoval, Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends, which is like hand animated Metroidvania adventure based on a very old comic strip. So got lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, and I've had my hands on Little Nemo before, and I think it's an excellent game. And just the taking of the base story and allowing it to live and breathe in players' hands, it gives it some really cool context, and I think that's awesome. But before we get into some of the nuances there, just to kind of get things going, I know that you're deep busy, you got your students, you got your degree, you're teaching, but what game are you playing right now? Besides your own, of course, your students. Is there any game that's kind of captured your attention recently?
Yeah, I actually just put out a new ROM of Kudzu this week and had to do a all the way through play test, and I can do them pretty fast now. And like every time I play it, I got 100% to just make sure everything works actually. So I've been playing Prince of Persia, the new Prince of Persia.
Ooh.
Yeah, the Lost Crown. Excellent, excellent platformer, excellent Metroidvania. That's a genre I like a lot. But that's been really cool. It's cool to see that franchise interpreted in that way. I think you play it and you're like, why hasn't this always been one of these? And one of my favorite games ever is still Sands of Time. So it's excited to see. Yeah, like if you like those games from like that era of Prince of Persia, there's a lot to like in this one. So cannot recommend that one enough. And then I've been kind of like chipping away at Sea of Stars. That's
a really big indie one right there. So cool.
It's so good. Yeah, and I mean, I played that and I'm like, man, I'm so jealous of my kids because they're playing it too, and they get to play it as kids, and I'm like, man, and like I had Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 3 and all those other things as a kid, but like, Sea of Stars is so good, and I'm like,
just
man,
imagine having that at their age.
Experience this as them.
Yeah, it's so cool and it's so artistic, and the mechanics just boil down in such an elegant way. I agree with you. Speaking of indie games,
help me out though. What's Sea of Stars? I don't know. Maybe some of our listeners.
So Sea of Stars is a Japanese role. It's an indie game that is inspired by Japanese role-playing games. Specifically, it is very Chrono Trigger.
Very. And
it is very Mario RPG in terms of its mechanics. So
live action button pressing.
Yeah, like there's reflex-based button pressing. There's combos between the different characters. And it's sort of in this world that is like you are these sort of wizard knights who have like powers derived from the sun and the moon. And I don't want to go into like any more than that because it has a lot of twists and turns. But it's a really cool set of mechanics. They had a lot of fun with like the classes, the character classes. Like one of the party members you get is a warrior cook. So his job is to both like take ingredients you get from the environment and turn it into meals, but then also like and be the healer, but also he can fight. So it's really great. The setting is great. The mechanics are great. It's a lot of fun. The music's amazing.
It really is. I've heard the soundtrack on that. It's definitely a bop. One of those background tracks. It has this just really nice 16-bit sweeping feel to it. Very Final Fantasy VI to me when I'm listening to it personally. Speaking of indie games, though, I just wanted to put this one on your radar. It's all over my TikTok, and I just downloaded it. Have you heard of Another Crab's Treasure yet?
Yes. It's one of those ones where I'm like, I should download it right now. And then it's like, I have so many other games I need to finish, like Sea of Stars and Prince of Persia. But yeah, no, it's on my radar because like my kids like watching me play Elden Ring, and that's another game I gotta both finish and then get ready for the new DLC coming this summer.
I love that's the narrative. I love that. I have to get ready for the Elden Ring DLC. I need to clean my schedule. That is an active narrative in the gaming sphere right now.
Yes, yeah. So they like watching me play Elden Ring, and they like SpongeBob, and it is like SpongeBob Elden Ring.
It's SpongeBob Elden Ring. That's exactly what it is. It's like Dark Bob square ring pants. I don't know.
My kids loved watching me play Elden Ring too, so much so, true story, we actually got in trouble back when they were in daycare because my one son, when they would go on walks, one time he said he was battling a bunch of skeletons, and then we had to get pulled in the office to talk about it. So,
At least he wasn't saying like I'm using blood magic.
No, yeah, right, yeah. The teacher was like, yeah, Hudson on his walk today was talking about how we was battling skeletons. I was like, yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have me watching.
Then he mentioned something about a crab coming out of a swamp suddenly.
Right, well, that's what God, those crabs terrify me, Jesus.
They're horrifying.
They're horrifying.
Oh, they're terrifying. Yeah, the crabs and the lobsters are even worse. And what I love about that game is, because I think FromSoft's games, they're like, oh, they're so dark. It's like, no, they're actually very funny. They're actually like they've got a sense of humor. You just got to be able to pick out the sense of humor. But when people ask like, well, why is Elden Ring so cool? And again, like my entire family will watch me play, but I explain it as, okay, so think of the bunny scene from Monty Python, the Holy Grail.
The runaway. I am running away so much in that game.
Fight this thing. Run away.
The
video game. That's
so
it.
True.
That's what Elden Ring is. It's that scene. The video game. Hundreds of hours.
That's a wonderful metaphor, Chris. You know what's also wonderful? Segue here. You know what's also wonderful? Kudzu getting on the Switch store. I love that you put it at a nice price point and it's out there. How's it feel, man? It must be really great to go and do you just every once in a while log on to the store and just sit back and take a hot cup of coffee or whatever you're drinking and be like, that's mine. That's me right there.
I saw a picture today of somebody who had beaten it for their review for their YouTube channel, and they seemed to really like it, which yay. And they showed a picture of their Switch screen, and it was like Kudzu, Vampire Survivor, and that new pinball game that's like the Alien or Devil's Crush kind of spiritual successor. I can't remember the name of it. I'm like, wow, that's a
good pedigree.
Yeah, it's like that's my game next to some real bangers there. Cool. No, it's really great. And one of the things that I try to tell folks is, and I try to teach my students is like, okay, do what will get you able to ship, and sometimes, because I think a lot of people when they learn how to make games, they're very obsessed with learning
search for perfection,
like Unreal or Unity, and they get kind of bogged down in the technical details of things like lighting and which you should know that stuff that gives you skills, and that those skills can get you a job someday and things like that. But if you're setting out to make games by yourself, just ship something. And I was listening to another games podcast today called The Nice Games Club, also from the Midwest. And the episode was about Game Maker, the Game Maker engine. And they were saying it's Game Maker is not seen as one of the big engines, but it's the engine that made the project such that they could get it shipped. And I think that's a really important lesson for folks is with what I did with Kudzu, it's a Game Boy homebrew game built in an engine called GB Studio, which is easy to pick up, and it's like no coding required, because it uses like a visual scripting interface. It's bound to the limitations of the Game Boy, so very limited color palette if you use the color palette at all. Black and white and all that other fun stuff. And
a little
then
bit of green.
it has, like only so many sprites can be on the screen. All the stuff with Game Boy, basically. But like that keeps your scope really concise, and then you just have to build what you can within that. So I liked it a lot. It was great.
I love how you're bringing up 2 points that I think are so valuable. That's almost ubiquitous between any artistic medium. Number one, restrictions breed creativity. I imagine that in your journey with the Game Boy creation of Kudzu, having less options opened up the door to creativity maybe a little bit more than having the infinite sphere of, say, the Unreal Engine. Would that resonate with you, kind of?
Yeah, and in fact, like, so the basic story of Kudzu as a project was that I had a thing in architecture school, like way back when, where we did this project, and it was on this site that had a field of Kudzu in it. None of us kids from the north knew what Kudzu was, because I went.
It's not really something we encounter. It's just not.
No, it's not. So like, but I went to school in DC where like there was Kudzu around, and and all my classmates were like New York, New Jersey, Philly, things like that. We were like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's a weird, cool, like type of ivy. Let's make a project. Let's put that in our project. And so like, I put a porch into it. People in my group made like hedge mazes out of it, all this other stuff. And then my assistant dean, like basically called BS on all of us. And like in the final presentation, and our teacher didn't even know what it was. And it was like, you realize that's an invasive plant that murders everything. And we were all like, oh crap. Our teacher bailed us out though, which was really amazing. I was telling that story to my wife. She was like, my brother used to fight off invasive vines in our backyard, not Kudzu, because like it's really aggressive, but like other stuff with a machete. And we were like, hey, what if we made a game about your brother fighting evil Kudzu with a machete? And it turned into like a game design document that I honestly had on like in my Google Drive for over 10 years until I found GB Studio and was like, oh, what? I'm not going to learn this. I want to learn this because it can ship Game Boy or it can make Game Boy games, but I'm not going to learn it unless I have a project. And I was like, oh, what if I made Kudzu? What if I finally did it? And that's how it turned out. But yeah, like you said, I had to take what I envisioned for it and like pare it way down in terms of like how much stuff could be on screen at one time, things like that. I had to make all of the puzzles very focused. I had to pare down like how different the tools could be. I kind of had to like, because you're not even just working with the restriction of Game Boy, you're working within the restrictions of this sort of interface placed on top of Game Boy game making. So it's like, I don't have access to all the tricks. You know what I mean? Like all the memory management, all the background tile switching and all this other stuff. So I had this kind of truncated version of an already truncated system, but that really forced me into like a good little box where it was like, I could make a whole
ecosystem, the whole thing.
Like I could.
I'm just thinking about the Kudzu. I can already imagine it. I haven't seen the game personally, but I can see it defining lines and making it as a move through, and making the whole and kind of drawing to another thing. Perfection is the enemy of progress. Very Winston Churchill here. I mean, Tom, I think in the same speak we can say, while we always want to go for perfection out of everything, is putting something together and being able to get out there and present it is such a keen skill unto itself.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's what when you were talking about this, Chris, I'm also drawing similarities, just even us putting on the show every year and what we talk about. We're like, listen, we're going to get this out there. It's going to be our first effort into doing this at the show. It might not be exactly the way we want it, but people are going to love it. And if they want more, then we will iterate on it, right? I mean, that's what it's all about.
The tough part about that with this is that there are Game Boy cartridges out there, and it's like you can't patch a Game
Oh
Boy.
yeah.
So we had to get it like as good as it could be, you know, and like IQA tested it, and MegaCat, who's my publisher,
MegaCat, we love MegaCat here at
yeah,
what
MegaCat's
a great
great.
studio.
They're a lot of fun to work with. They QA tested it, and you know, but there was still bugs in it. There was still like a lot of bugs in it, and to the point where, you know, some of the early, you know, some of the early things have been like, oh, it has so many bugs, and it's like, well, some of those bugs are just limitations of either Game Boy or GB Studio. A lot of them have been able to be fixed. Like I actually, like I mentioned in our pre-recording talk, you know, I actually made a new build this week that even fixed a bunch more stuff, and that's already been shipped out to folks that, you know, have access to like some of the Kickstarter rewards that are digital.
Yeah.
And you know, like I'm hoping that gets put into the Switch version soon too.
I was gonna ask, so how frequently do you push those to like to Nintendo to update whatever's on like their marketplace?
The Nintendo one's not up to me because
Okay.
that goes through 8-Bit Legit, which is MegaCat and Retrotainment Games, like company that they have to do this kind of publishing on
Gotcha.
consoles with the retro stuff. So that's been kind of the pattern, is that we were gonna like have a holding pattern for a little while after the release, and then kind of say like, okay, what are some of the problems that we've seen? Can we push an update? And so that should be hopefully happening soon.
But for context too, like how long? I mean, I know we've been talking and we've done a lot of shows together for I don't even know how many years. But like
it was Wagner's, right? Like you guys actually were in
right?
Wagner's days.
Were you guys were at Wagner's, right, Chris? With Nemo, weren't you?
Yeah, we were with Nemo. I couldn't be there for that year.
You guys had Nemo there that year,
yeah,
I think.
Nemo was there, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. But to that point, like for whether it's Nemo or Kudzu, like I know it's kind of maybe a loaded question to a degree, but like how long with Kudzu specifically, like has it taken so far to get to where it is?
Yeah, a bit over 3 years. Because and you know, that's the thing, is like it's I can beat it in 3.5 hours or
Right.
so. 3 hours, 3.5 hours, like average play time 6 to 7 hours, and like so 3 years to get that kind of puts it into context for folks how long it takes. If there's like a bug with like animation, because you know, and one of the ones I patched, for example, was like if you walk into one of the save rooms while you are using the machete, your animation will be the machete fighting animation in the room until you like leave the room. It's a bug. It was easy to fix, but people will be like, they'll say that and they'll be like, oh, there's an animation bug. Didn't they test this? And then I'll be like, yeah, I did. You should have seen some of the like
bigger bugs. We're talking some real cicadas, you know?
Yeah, it was like you should have seen some of the eldritch horrors that I had to destroy to get this to you.
In Elder Horrors, Cthulhu was very present.
Yeah, and so I mean that is one of the tough parts with cartridges, is like, you know, we can't. The game is very stable, and people were really enjoying it. There was some things that, you know, I mean, and this is not unusual. Like I have my copy of Mega Man 2 up there, and it's like revision A, you know, so that happens, and there's that stuff. So you kind of have to deal with that when you do this retro stuff, especially the modern retro stuff. But you know, and we talk about this a lot, me and James from MegaCat, and he's like, you know, if you're putting out patches and other, you know, versions and things like that, that actually does go a long way in showing folks like, you know, we're being diligent, we're going after this stuff, because you can only really do so much, like with any game. With it, like, you know, we're talking about my like homebrew Game Boy game that I made with me and like a few of my students helping with some of the art and stuff like that. You have like big AAA titles coming out, barely working, and then having to almost like redeem themselves over like a matter of years, like Cyberpunk, right? So
Fallout 76.
Yeah, exactly.
It's definitely, you can always tell a labor of love, no matter what size the game is. And as you kind of spoke earlier before, the artistry should reflect that because of just a lot of those things that have to go. And that all comes truthfully from a starting place, being a student. And as a teacher, I imagine you find a lot of people coming in with one expectation of how game development and game creation is, but then they realize that it's something way different. So I would ask you, what is something that you would say to someone coming in to kind of let them know what they're in store for? Maybe like a pathos or an ethos.
So we actually cover this in our admissions at Kent State, and have been told by parents that doing this makes them feel better about sending their kids to game design school because Northeast Ohio. The funny thing about Northeast Ohio and game development is that if everybody that I've ever met in the games industry from Northeast Ohio moved back, we would be like the Bay Area. We'd be like Austin or something.
There's something about us being like a Silicon Valley of the Midwest.
Right. That notwithstanding, but there's a lot of people that want to do this here. And to get like into kind of the boosterism there is that thing of like the work ethic, the Northeast Ohio work ethic and all that other stuff. But I actually do find that it holds true with game developers because people are willing to just like, okay, where can I chip in? Where can I, obviously making sure everybody's properly accredited and compensated and all that other fun stuff. I don't want to make it sound like it's all volunteer work or something. But I think everybody is very much like, wanting to coordinate and wanting to be like a good, healthy, productive community, right?
Yeah.
So with students and their families, one of the things that we really like to cover is, the reason that you know about Call of Duty and Mario and Halo and all these other like big franchises is that they're what's marketed to you and sold to you as consumer products. So you might think that's where games are made. Those are the only types of games that you're aware of. But, and we were talking about indie games, right? There's smaller studios where you can get a job, or there are entrepreneurship opportunities to form your own studio. There are a lot of people who work some other job during the day, and the balance that they have found is to work something else during the day and then make games like on a contract basis or something like that. Like I have a former student who's working with Jiley Games on Rah Rah Boom right now down in Cincinnati.
With Chris Bergman, yeah.
But that's kind of the balance he's found, right? And he has his own studio that he uses to put out stuff when he makes something cool. So again, that's the balance he's found. But then there's also instances where you have stuff that's not marketed to you. So like that's the indie space, right? But the other stuff that's not marketed to you at all is like medical games, simulation training games for different
corporate training functions,
corporate trainings, like different causes, non-government entities, nonprofits. They all make games, and I used to live in Washington D.C. I'm from here, lived in D.C. for a bunch of years, and I worked on what were called serious games, like games for not just entertainment purposes, but I made games for like the educational testing service, the people that made the SAT, and organizations like that, because they would use games for assessments or for other purposes, or even just like research units at universities. There are companies that make games in those contexts that, again,
great way to make a living, right?
Yeah, so it's like our job is to teach students that the game industry is much broader than you think it is, and especially at a time where like you hear all these stories like Activision laid more people off and this company laid more people off and Embracer is burning everything to the ground, and you want to be able to tell people like that's happening, but these other places are mostly fine. It's just because like AAA's seeing this stuff doesn't mean that you're beholden to work at those.
Not often, I would say, in 2024, do people have the opportunity to just have one job and that's their thing, right? I think that's kind of the point you're getting at. And I know, Tom, the show that all three of us were at last year, GDEX, some of the great developers that were there were just two guys or two girls working in their basement in their hours between, and it's a labor of love, and they get to go out to these conventions and showcase their work. And those stories to me, like Echo Blade, our friends at Echo Blade, I really enjoy seeing them at our show and GDEX and other Northeast Ohio people. And it's something truly inspiring. I know, Tom, there's a couple of shows that you got to, or a couple of games you got to take a look at GDEX.
Yeah,
and
I
our
mean,
show.
it's the story of it doesn't feel like work, right? Like you can log on and just do it any time, right? It's like us, again, drawing parallels to the show because it's what I know, right? Like we all have our jobs that we need, we have families, and we, what we do day in and day out. But then when you sign on to do this type of stuff, it just clicks, right? And you can get in the zone. And I always tell my wife, it's like, she's like, what are you still doing? Like, why are you still in your office? I'm like, I didn't even realize it's been like 5 hours and I've been working on show stuff because it's just fun. It's like playing a video game.
You can't teach passion. You cannot teach passion. And I imagine that's probably a big identifier for you, Chris, in that admissions process, is finding the passion for the games. And it's not just being able to do Fortnite dances.
Right. And at the same time, you have to balance it. We actually try to avoid the word passion because passion can also be exploitable.
Sure.
You hear about these horror stories, again, in the AAA space where people are like, well, aren't you passionate enough? Like, no, you don't want to unionize. This is about passion. Here's a pizza party. We try to avoid that. Like, don't, hey, these are red flags. Like, make sure you're not exploited, and understand that, you can choose where you want to go. Like, if you see red flags, don't take the job, even if you're just looking for that first job. Like, don't set yourself up to be exploited. So that's something that we do try to tell students too when it comes to the passion part.
I mean, that's a lovely way of teaching people self-worth. And
that's great.
That in the end is the lesson that you're teaching there. You're not, I'm gonna sound real boomer here, y'all. So here we go. In Disney Channel original movies, there's a movie called Brink. And there's a guy named Andy Brinker who always said, skating is what we do, not who we are. And it's just that self-worth piece, right? It's like, just because I'm a game developer doesn't mean that I have to be working at Activision in order to be considered a game developer, right? You have self-worth beyond that.
That was literally the mantra of like a bunch of folks at GDC this year. It's like, it's just a job. At the end of the day, it's just a job. It's not you. It's just a job. Along those lines, the other thing we always do have to, and this goes back to the GB Studio, Game Maker, whatever engine thing, it's also breaking folks' brains of thinking that it is about tool training in the biggest thing. Like, yeah, we're going to tool train you in the biggest thing, and you're going to make stuff in the biggest thing because that's just like responsible on our part in terms of like making sure our students have employable skills. But again, it goes back to like, well, how big's your team? Can you get something in the world? And some people don't want to do that. Some people want to be the person that can be the best at making materials and then in a 3D context. And then, they go get the AAA job, right? Part of our job is to be like, well, not everybody's going to want one thing. So we kind of say like, okay, what are you into? Okay, so here's what you're going to do if you're into that. Here's what you're going to do in the rest of your classes. You're going to be in your group work. You're going to be the person who does materials, and that's going to be your specialty. And you're going to make a portfolio of all your awesome materials. And then we're going to try to set you up with like, go look at people who make that in AAA and like, let's get your portfolio in that shape. Right.
Yeah.
But then there are people that are like, I just want to put something out and be like, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to download GB Studio. You're going to make this. And then you're going to like, go talk to this publisher, and you might actually get a deal. Like that scene is like smaller or something like that. We try to put people in the position to succeed in the way that they want to succeed. And some people it is like learning the biggest, best tool out there that's like all the AAAs use. And sometimes it's like, hey, you just want to like express yourself through interactivity. Let's like come up with some cool solutions for that.
Yeah.
But again, people don't expect that. And it is kind of it's a conversation to say, there's a lot of things you can do with this.
Right. And that's what I always wonder too, because we even get people that hit us up about the show, like, oh, my son or daughter is interested in being, involved with video game design or developer. And first of all, I'm like, okay, I can point you in the right direction, or we have this at the show. But in my mind, I'm like, well, that means a lot to a lot of different people. Like, are you into the storytelling aspect? Like, why? Like you're saying, it's like, what is it that you're interested in? Because there's a lot going on there, right? You might be very good at telling stories, you might be very good as a developer, you know a lot more than I do, but that's kind of, a very broad stroke to apply and to say, like, every team, every project probably needs specific team members for those things, and you also have to identify what you naturally are good at or can evolve to be good at, right?
Well, and a lot of it is like prepping people for the drudgery that's going to come out.
No,
Cool.
nothing made well is not without some level of pain and drudgery. 100%.
Right. Well, it's like, okay, you like telling stories. Okay, let's get you used to putting all of your lines of dialogue in a spreadsheet with like extensive notes on each line of dialogue, where its context is going to be, what its sound file is going to be, is like, who's going to say it, all this other stuff, right?
I also have a side of equations in that Excel spreadsheet too, please. Could I have some nice equations with sums and equals?
Right. Oh, and then also to have a team look at it and rip it apart, right? I mean, that's the other piece
the editing process. Yeah, I love that. My favorite too. Now you're roping in like English majors who like have to be very specific about a particular word.
Well, and game design it's a hard field. Like Jesse Shell from down in Pittsburgh, Shell Games, also semi neighbors, right? He has this book, The Art of Game Design, and one of the first pages of it is, to be a good game designer, you need to know these disciplines. And it is 2 columns of like math, programming, art, puppetry, acting, architecture, and it just goes in, like, it is everything. It is like, everything is like something that there's a degree in, basically, like master's degrees in. And the point being that like all of these things go into video games, and you mentioned before, like, it's not just about doing your Fortnite dances. There are sometimes where like the conversation has to go from like helping a student go from consumer to creator, and sometimes that does involve like they think, oh, okay, well, I'm really into games, or I'm into these fandoms, and that's going to put me in a good position in game design school. And then I walk in there and I'm like, we're going to talk about behavioral psychology. And they're like,
these are all things that were not on my list for us to talk about tonight: puppetry and Fortnite dances. But to that point, I mean, there is that person in the room that is saying that this is the dance we need in Fortnite, and here's why, and just choreograph it, and then to work with someone else, right? So,
this has just become an ad for Kent State, but you know what? This is a Northeast Ohio podcast, so I don't mind.
There we go.
This is why our electives, like, when I show people our list of electives, they're like, why are there so many? I'm like, if you want to be a character artist, go take a fashion class. If you want to be an animator, go take an acting class. If you want to be a level designer, go take an architecture class. Like,
that is so fascinating.
It just goes to show you that when you think about the art of making art, it's about putting it all together. And what I also like about this Kent State is that it seems like it is context-driven and responsible education in a domain that looks glamorous and has a lot of like yield in the end of it, right? A lot of pride come out of putting that artistry, but being able to give it that context and be specific about people, that's truthfully what you want out of an educator. Chris, I think you're showing them all through actions that you are emblematic of the words that you're teaching, and I think that's absolutely amazing. Wouldn't you agree, Tom?
I'm just excited that Chris has probably taken a fashion class. That's what I've learned the most out of this podcast.
I am imagining Chris right now,
or puppetry. I've been waiting for him to bust out I'm waiting for you to bust out a puppet, either that or that, Chris.
I am right now imagining you, Chris, in a remake of The Devil Wears Prada. Just so you know, it's in my it's in my headcanon right now, and that's not going away.
No, I mean, my
halfway?
is that I have the architecture part covered, because that was what I said.
That was your master's, right?
Is that your Art Vandalay? Are you Art Vandalay, the architect?
Yeah.
We're uncovering secrets here.
Chris, you earned points with me. I get that. You got that.
Nothing is above architecture.
Nothing is above architecture. That's a Seinfeld reference for those of you.
For those who don't know.
Man, we have a lot of boomer stuff here. I love it, but I also Love that you came and joined us here today. Chris, thank you so much for joining the Cleveland Gaming Podcast. I know you're going to be at a lot of different shows. Kent State University, the amazing video game degree program coordinator for animation game design. Tell us, what places are you going to go this year? What shows can we get a chance to feature Little Nemo and Kudzu in real life and convention scene?
So, of course, Cleveland Gaming Classic.
What? Wild. Oh my gosh.
Right in our backyard.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're going there. We are going to be at Too Many Games over the summer in late June
Great choice.
in Philly. We are actually, so Little Nemo is also going to be on display in the Chicago Game Space starting in the middle of May,
Oh, that's so
which
cool.
is an art
Yeah.
gallery
Mhm.
devoted to the art of video games. And it's going to be
Mhm.
displayed next to prints of Winsor McKay's original Little Nemo comics.
Oh man, what a dream!
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's really wild.
That's so cool.
What else? GDEX, of course.
Of course.
You know, our other home show.
Friend of the show, Chris and Luke.
The show. Yeah, and then you know, we're gonna go for MagFest again. MagFest is a show that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts. The Music and Gaming Festival in National Harbor, Maryland. And then yeah, like, you know, what we're really focused on. One of the things, you know, you're talking about expectations. When you do work in small contexts like that, you have to tell people like it's gonna take a little longer because, you know, again, Kudzu took 3 years for a Game Boy game, right? A card game I made a few years ago, La Mancha, based on the novel Don Quixote,
The man
was
of
like
Lancia.
a 2-year plus project, and it's a card game, right? So these take a while, but you know, we're pushing really hard towards a chapter 1 release for Little Nemo. We've got 3 out of the 4 major biomes already basically done, so you know, things are chugging along. And
That's
and we have,
such a beautiful game. I mean, if you haven't played it, make sure you play it at a show. I mean, it's amazing, and you guys have won. I don't even know how many awards probably for art direction, or it's unbelievable. It's a cool game.
hand animating has been a lot of work, but so worth it. And now I am such a better animator. I was pretty good before. Now I'm very comfortable in that with that too. So it's been a lot of fun.
And of course, friends, do not forget that you can also find these games, particularly Kudzu, on the Switch store. Again, congratulations. What a wonderful accomplishment, Chris. I hope you have a chance to celebrate yourself because that's amazing.
Yeah, congrats, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I will look forward to hanging out in the near future here and you know.
Of course, we're doing the thing, folks. And that's the end thesis, right? Sometimes you just got to do the thing.
That's how it feels as a developer at the end of the day, Corey. It's just doing the thing.
You know, between our fantasy drafts, top 10 lists, we have a lot of fun here, but I gotta say, I felt intellectually stimulated today, Tom, by some of the points that Chris made. Like, if I was a student at Kent State, I'd feel like I was in good hands after today's interview.
I agree. I mean, I felt like this was the most intellectual conversation we've had, and really put a lot of, I'll say, insight into the industry more than just, you know, playing games from developers and seeing the newest thing or backing what's on Kickstarter. It was really, really interesting to hear and talk to Chris.
Yeah, certainly. And if anyone's interested, do take a look at the game animation department at Kent State and go onto the Switch store and check out Kudzu, because I am just already picturing it in my mind, and I think it's going to be a great game to just sit down, enjoy, finish. Oh,
I was
sounds
thinking
great.
about the same thing during when he was talking. I'm like, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Switch, I'm going to go in the bedroom tonight, and then immediately download this game. So yeah, please check it out.
Save yourself a cup of Starbucks coffee and download Kudzu instead. But we'd also love to hear what you think. Have you ever thought about being a game developer? Was there something about that domain that you learned today in the episode? Comment on the post about this show on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. That's the Cleveland Gaming Classic. And don't forget about our website as well, gamecleveland.com. And pick up your tickets today for our show, September 20th through the 22nd. And of course, get one of those really cool 3D printed cartridges for the year. They're going to be really sweet. Honestly, they were one of our most asked about items last year. And you can get your hands on one of them for this year. Tom, I can't wait to see them.
I know. I think someone actually even online today placed an order for 10 of them. So yeah, get one of those carts. You don't want to be one of the people at the show that doesn't have one of those carts. But before I shill any more merch, which I mean I should do, Corey, what do you think? Do we hit save on this file on the podcast for now?
I think so, and we'll write down the password as well. We'll pick it up next time here on the show. My name is Corey.
And this is Final Boss Tom.
And look at him. He's trying to get the timbre of my voice. I love it. And thanks for listening to the Cleveland Gaming Podcast. We'll see you on the next one.
Powering down.